This is Dr. David Allen coming to you on the television program, People Helping People. The Bahamas is facing the challenge of perhaps an opioid epidemic. This is wreaking havoc in America at this time, and as we all know, what happens in America somehow finds itself in the Bahamas. An opioid epidemic is very serious because you die from respiratory depression quickly. And in the States, in some states, we have to give kids Narcan to spray their parents as they take overdoses. Our challenge is to be educated about this before this occurs. Dr. KirkChristie, a distinguished psychiatrist who heads our addiction program for the government, has been studying this thoroughly. In fact, Dr. Christie perhaps is the first psychiatrist to have in the Bahamas the drug that counteracts opiate addiction, Suboxone. He's going to talk about that. It's so important to stay tuned and listen to us because, you know, whom God loves, He always forewarns. If we could take the warning, maybe we could miss the tragedy. But an opioid epidemic in the Bahamas, if that gets root, will have a devastating effect on our country. Dr. Christie, what's an opioid epidemic?
Yes, from the treatment side, we know that we are having problems in our communities with the misuse of opioids. And a list of the common opioids that are misused include Percocet, Vicodin, Demerol, hydrocodone, pethidine, morphine, and the likes.
But Dr. Christie, you can only get those through a prescription. So how are people getting them in our country?
Yes, patients who access their primary physician or their doctor who's dealing with their pain disorder would prescribe these medications. But we know that there are some persons accessing these prescriptions through the back door. Sometimes they may steal a prescription from a doctor and forge a signature. They may be going to pharmacies and purchasing
But we don't have
drugs.
pharmacists who are prescribing these drugs without prescriptions.
Yes, well, from my knowledge, all of the pharmacies, they would take a prescription and they won't really receive any call-in from the physician. They need the hard prescription for these medications. But patients and other persons can be crafty. And so they may shop around to different doctors to get a prescription. And right now in the Bahamas, we have a problem with pharmacies being able to intercommunicate with one another.
For example, Dr. Christie, if one of your patients is given a prescription for OxyContin, an opiate, then comes to see me and I don't know that,
yes,
then I give them a prescription. Then
yes,
they go to another doctor, a general
yes,
practitioner, saying they have pain in the leg.
yes,
And they get another prescription.
yes.
Can that happen in the Bahamas?
We suspect that it is happening, and this is called doctor shopping or polypharmacy, where patients shop around to different doctors to access the opioid drug that they're misusing.
Do we have a structure in place in the Bahamas to block this?
We are now making some inroads where pharmacies are communicating with each other, and persons who are misusing opioids, some of these individuals are now being blacklisted or they put on a list for vigilance. And so we know that there are persons in the community that are selling opioid drugs as well, the drug pushers and drug peddlers who may be selling the opioid drugs on the black market. So that we know that is happening as well in the country.
Because we hear about the police and the DA getting cocaine and marijuana or marijuana plants, but we hardly hear about them getting opioids. So are they coming on the underhand market as well?
Yes, Dr. Allen, and we have a lot of courier services and freight forwarders. So we import a lot of items into the Bahamas. And so this is an avenue for persons to hide opioid drugs where they would have purchased them in the United States of America, or they're ordering them online to certain websites on the dark web. And so we also have porous borders in that we have some rural communities, and so in these rural communities, we know we have a lot of persons who could smuggle drugs into the country in the southern Bahamas, and they end up in New Providence and or Grand Bahama, Apico, with the densely populated areas of the Bahamas.
Dr. Christie, what are some of the signs if somebody has an opiate addiction?
The signs of an opioid addiction would be the evidence of self-neglect, where the person who would have been neat and tidy and paying close attention to their body habitus and their hygiene, they lose these type of concerns. So you would find that the person is disheveled, they're dressing inappropriately, color mismatch, they may have on soiled clothing. There's also mood swings. If you see the acute onset of mood swings, which are deteriorating to marked irritability. Also, persons who may be yawning a lot or being on a nod, where they seem to be sleeping while they're standing up, or they're sitting down and they just appear to be sleeping. And this is called being on a nod. Those are the red flags. There are also persons who have excessive sweating. There may be also history of episodes of constipation. This is a red flag where you have to be suspicious of opioid misuse.
And can an opioid addiction kill a person?
Yes, it can. A lot of the opioids, they're very powerful agents in that they bring on a state of sedation. Some of these agents, such as morphine, are used for pre-sedation for surgical procedures. It can bring on sedation. It can also cessate the respiratory drive centers in the brain. So they can bring on respiratory depression and death.
And that can happen pretty quickly?
It can happen very quickly if they don't have access to Narcan, which is the antidote to reverse this opioid suppression of the respiration drive.
Do we have Narcan here in the Bahamas?
Yes, I have checked the emergency rooms. We have Narcan available at the Princess Margaret Hospital and also at the Doctors Hospital as well. And privately at the centers, at Rejuvenate Bahamas, we have the Suboxone kit that can be used to withdraw somebody from opioid intoxication.
What's the attraction to opioid use?
Well, the attraction is that we have anecdotal information that there are a lot of people suffering with chronic pain disorders. So there are patients in the Bahamas who have legitimate pain disorders, such as lower back injuries. They may have lumbar strain. They may have disc problems, and there are some medical issues that are associated with pain disorders, such as osteoarthritis, osteoporosis. But the persons who continually take the opioid and it is not being surveilled by their primary doctor can lead to addiction. And certainly in cases where the patient is shopping around to various doctors to gain access to the opioid, this lends to the onset of an opioid addiction and continuance of the addiction. So we know that there are legitimate complaints for the pain medication, but the person really needs to be surveilled. After 4 weeks of being on the opioid drug, the patient should be sent to a pain management center if they're still having pain. And I would just like to let patients know out there that medications alone do not help your chronic pain disorder. There are also other holistic treatments in terms of physiotherapy, acupressure, acupuncture, meditation, those type of things help in association with the medication. Medication alone does not address your pain disorder and issues. After 4 weeks of being a minimum of 2 weeks, but if you're going beyond 4 weeks and you're being prescribed an opioid drug, you really need to have a heart-to-heart discussion with your primary doctor or pain specialist and immediate referral to a pain management center. And if there are signs of the addiction, signs and symptoms of the addiction, to a psychiatrist for a psychiatric evaluation.
And Dr. Christie, we have some evidence that the opiates are showing up. Opiate addiction is starting to show up.
Yes.
Slowly, but we've had a few cases, right?
Yes, we have data from the National Anti-Drug Secretariat, from the Bahamas National Drug Council, from our stakeholders in the drug supply reduction area forces. So we know that opioids make it into the country from time to time, and they are usually confiscated by the authorities, specifically Custom and Immigration Department. But as you're aware, there's been the proliferation of freight forwarders, courier system. So we know that some people are able to order these drugs on the dark web and have them delivered to the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. So we know greater surveillance needs to be had at our borders, specifically at the Customs and Immigration Department area, and vigilance by the Royal Bahamas Police Force in the rural islands, where drug pushers and drug peddlers can bring in these substances.
But can people buy the narcotics on the street?
Anecdotally, I have heard that persons are able to buy OxyContin and Percocet tablets on the street. So we know that there are drug pushers and drug peddlers in our communities now selling these drugs, and they target relatively younger individuals in their late teenage years, and also the second decade of life, and also persons who have these chronic pain disorders who have been blacklisted. They sometimes would access these drug pushers and drug peddlers on the street who are selling OxyContin and hydrocodone and Percocet tablets.
What about fentanyl? Can we get that here?
Fentanyl, I have not heard much about fentanyl being the availability on the black market, but we have to be mindful that fentanyl is a very dangerous drug, in that it is about 80 to 100 times more potent than that of morphine. And of course,
fentanyl is what, 80 times more potent
than morphine, which is a
Wow.
drug used within the emergency room and surgical suites for, for pain relief before surgical procedures. And certainly now we have we've heard of the proliferation of synthetic fentanyl, which is now a problem in the United States of America and also in Europe.
Synthetic means so they make that?
They make it in the what they call clandestine labs. So fentanyl is not a novel drug. The synthetic fentanyl has been around for a long time, and so now you have analogs of fentanyl, which was an illegal drug. It has to be prescribed, especially in the emergency room setting. But now we have clandestine labs creating synthetic fentanyl, which mimic it's an analogs of the original fentanyl compound. And the danger with synthetic fentanyl is that the symptoms are amplified as a very potent drug, and novice users of synthetic fentanyl can die almost instantaneously after one-time use of synthetic fentanyl. So certainly a drug we do not want in the Bahamas, and we will have to continue to surveil. And the issue with synthetic fentanyl and synthetic marijuana is that they are not controlled internationally by the conventions of narcotic drugs of 1961 and also of the international conventions on psychotropic drugs of 1971. So it's not controlled internationally. It may be controlled in country, nationally, but it doesn't prevent exporters of these drugs. They export it to the United States of America and also to the Caribbean region as well. So we have to be really vigilant with these synthetic drugs.
You mentioned synthetic marijuana. Is that the same as marijuana?
It's not similar. It is dissimilar to the plant marijuana in that the synthetic marijuana, aka also known as spice or K2. Spice.
Spice.
Yeah.
Spice.
Spice. It's commonly known as spice in the United States of America. And also K2, and is also known as the Green Monster, and there are other brands of it. It is sold in a lot of retail stores in the United States of America, through the rural parts, southern states, and also in Florida.
What's the danger of synthetic marijuana?
Very potent. It is commonly associated with marijuana addiction, marijuana use disorders. There is approximately 60 to 90% of the tetrahydrocannabinol, which is a psychoactive substance, is present in the synthetic marijuana, which makes it very potent. And because of the packaging with respect to spice and K2, it is very appealing to teenagers and who would be able to purchase it. But it's actually dried vegetable leaves, about 3 grams of vegetable leaves, which is dried and sprayed with the synthetic tetrahydrocannabinol, or the analog of the plant THC.
Wow.
A very dangerous drug, and certainly it is one we don't want in the Bahamas. It will lead to the development of addiction, marijuana addiction, and also psychosis associated because of the potency of synthetic marijuana.
We're going to take a break and be right back.